My mother pulled me aside just minutes before my brother's wedding and whispered, "Please, take off your uniform. You're embarrassing the family." She handed me a garment bag with a designer suit inside, begging me to change before the guests arrived. I quietly zipped the bag shut and walked into the ballroom wearing my dress blues anyway. First, people stared. Then 12 elderly veterans slowly rose from their seats, one after another. The entire room fell silent. But what happened next, when the bride's billionaire crossed the ballroom toward me, changed my family's lives forever. And before we continue, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel. I'm also curious, where are you watching from and what time is it there right now? Let me know in the comments below. Now, let's get back to the story. My name is Captain Emma Brooks and I'm 34 years old. For the last 13 years, I've proudly served in the United States military. My uniform has carried me through hurricanes, rescue missions, long deployments, and moments that changed my life forever. Every medal on my chest represents a team that stood together, not just me. But to my family, it was always just a uniform. When my younger brother Ethan announced he was getting married, I couldn't have been happier for him. He and his fiancée Claire had planned a beautiful wedding at a historic estate just outside the city. Nearly 150 guests were expected, including business executives, community leaders, and several well-known families. A week before the ceremony, my mother called. "Emma," she began carefully, "we need to talk about what you're wearing." I already knew where the conversation was headed. "I'll be attending in my dress blues," I answered. There was a long silence. Finally, she sighed. "Honey, don't." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "It'll attract too much attention. This is Ethan's day. Please wear a regular dress instead." I looked at the neatly pressed uniform hanging in my closet. I've worn this uniform to military ceremonies, memorial services, and official weddings. It's appropriate. Mom's voice grew softer. People don't always understand military traditions. I smiled sadly. Then maybe this is a chance for them, too. She didn't argue anymore, but I could hear the disappointment in her voice before she quietly ended the call. On the morning of the wedding, I carefully polished my shoes, adjusted every ribbon, and fastened each medal exactly where it belonged. As I looked into the mirror, I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I was honoring every person who had served beside me. I had no idea my biggest challenge that day wouldn't come from strangers. It would come from my own family. The wedding venue looked like something out of a magazine. White roses lined the entrance, a string quartet played beneath towering oak trees, and guests in elegant suits and designer gowns filled the courtyard with cheerful conversation. The moment I stepped out of my car, I noticed several people glanced toward my dress blues. Some smiled politely. A few nodded with quiet respect. Before I could reach the entrance, my mother hurried toward me. She wasn't smiling. "Emma, come with me." She led me into a small bridal preparation room and quietly closed the door behind us. Without saying a word, she lifted a garment bag from a nearby chair and unzipped it. Inside hung a beautiful navy blue designer dress. "I bought this for you," she said hopefully. I looked from the dress back to her. "You actually expected me to change?" She folded her hands together. "Please, before anyone sees you." I took a slow breath. "Mom, everyone has already seen me." She looked frustrated. "That's exactly the problem." A few seconds later, my father walked into the room. He glanced at my uniform before speaking. "Your mother is only trying to avoid unnecessary attention." I met his eyes calmly. "I'm not wearing this for attention." Dad sighed. "We just don't want people talking." I gently zipped the garment bag closed and placed it back on the chair. If people are talking because I'm honoring my service, then that's a conversation I'm comfortable with. Neither of them answered. I adjusted my jacket, straightened my cap under my arm, and walked toward the ballroom entrance. The conversation softened as I entered. Some guests smiled warmly. Others simply watched. I quietly took my seat near the back, hoping the focus would remain exactly where it belonged, on Ethan and Claire. As the ceremony began, I noticed something unexpected. An elderly gentleman across the aisle leaned forward, studying the medals on my uniform. Then another guest did the same. Within moments, several older men exchanged knowing glances. Something told me they had recognized far more than my uniform. The wedding ceremony was beautiful. Ethan and Claire exchanged heartfelt vows beneath an arch covered in white roses while sunlight filtered through the trees. For a little while, everyone forgot about my parents' concerns. I was grateful for that. After the ceremony, guests gathered inside the grand reception hall. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, and soft music filled the room as dinner was served. I stayed quietly at my table near the back. The evening wasn't about me. When dessert was finished, the master of ceremonies stepped onto the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "before tonight's first dance, we'd like to recognize all veterans joining us this evening. If you've served our country, please stand so we can thank you." Around the ballroom, several elderly men slowly rose to their feet. Guests applauded warmly. Then something unexpected happened. One gray-haired veteran looked across the room and froze. His eyes rested on the silver star pinned neatly above my ribbons. Without saying a word, he stood straighter and called out in a firm, respectful voice, "Silver Star recipient in the room." The applause faded into complete silence. One by one, the other veterans turned toward me. Then, almost as if they had rehearsed it, all 12 of them stood at attention. Every conversation stopped. One veteran removed his cap. Another raised a crisp salute. The others followed. I felt my throat tighten. Slowly, I stood from my chair and returned the salute with the same respect they had shown me. No words were necessary. The ballroom remained perfectly still for several seconds before someone began clapping. Then, another. Within moments, the entire room rose to its feet. The applause echoed through the hall. I glanced toward my parents. They looked completely stunned. My mother covered her mouth. My father stared silently at the veterans, finally realizing that the uniform he had wanted hidden wasn't drawing attention because it was distracting. It was inspiring. And that realization was only the beginning of a night none of us would ever forget. The applause gradually faded, but the atmosphere in the ballroom had completely changed. People were no longer whispering about my uniform. They were looking at it with admiration. As I lowered my salute, I noticed an older gentleman leaving the head table and walking directly toward me. He was tall, composed, and instantly recognizable. It was William Harrington, Claire's father. A respected businessman, philanthropist, and the man whose family foundation had funded countless education and veterans programs across the country. The room naturally grew quiet as he approached. He stopped in front of me and extended his hand. "Captain Brooks," he said with a warm smile. "It's an honor to finally meet you." I shook his hand. "The honor is mine, sir." He turned toward the guests and accepted the microphone from the master of ceremonies. "If I may," he began, "I'd like to add something before tonight continues." Everyone listened. "I've spent more than 20 years supporting organizations that help veterans transition back into civilian life." He gestured toward the 12 veterans still standing proudly nearby. "I've had the privilege of meeting extraordinary men and women who dedicated their lives to serving others." Then he looked back at me. "But meeting someone whose service has been recognized with one of our nation's highest military decorations is incredibly rare." The ballroom became silent once again. William smiled. "Captain Brooks, your uniform doesn't take attention away from this wedding." He paused. "It reminds us that commitment, sacrifice, and love of others deserve to be celebrated wherever they appear." Several guests nodded in agreement. He continued. "My daughter and my new son-in-law are beginning a life built on commitment." He looked around the room. "I can't imagine a better example of that commitment than someone who has devoted her career to serving others." The applause returned louder than before. As I thanked him quietly, William leaned closer and smiled. I hope you don't mind, he whispered. I've already arranged a donation to a military family support charity in honor of today's celebration. I felt my eyes sting. That's incredibly generous. He shook his head gently. No, Captain. He glanced toward the veterans, then toward my family. Generosity begins with recognizing people who deserve to be seen. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my brother smiling proudly. For the first time that day, my family wasn't trying to hide my uniform. They were finally seeing the person wearing it. The reception continued, but something inside our family had quietly shifted. People weren't surrounding me because of a medal. They were stopping to thank me for my service, shake my hand, or simply share stories about loved ones who had once worn the same uniform. One elderly woman wiped away a tear. My husband served for 30 years, she said softly. Seeing you today reminded me of him. Thank you. Her words meant more to me than she could ever know. A few minutes later, my mother walked toward me. Gone was the anxious expression she'd worn all afternoon. Cooked. Humbled. Emma, she whispered. I turned to face her. I'm sorry. For a moment, neither of us spoke. She glanced at my uniform before continuing. I wasn't embarrassed by you. She paused, searching for the right words. I was afraid people would stop paying attention to Ethan and Claire. I smiled gently. I understand. She shook her head. No. I don't think I understood anything. She looked around the ballroom where guests were laughing, dancing, and celebrating the newlyweds. The wedding is still beautiful. She smiled through tears. And somehow, your uniform didn't take anything away from it. I reached over and squeezed her hand. Respect doesn't steal someone else's spotlight. It simply reminds people that there are many reasons to celebrate. Just then, Ethan walked over wearing the biggest smile I'd seen all day. He wrapped me in a hug. You know, he laughed, I spent weeks worrying about centerpieces, music, and seating charts. I laughed. And I never imagined the most meaningful moment of the wedding wouldn't be something we planned. Claire joined us, still holding her bouquet. She smiled warmly. I'm proud to officially call you my sister. Before I could answer, one of the 12 veterans approached. Captain Brooks, he said with a grin. We're taking a group photograph before everyone leaves. I'd be honored if you'd stand with us. As we gathered together, the photographer raised his camera. My parents quietly stepped behind the veterans. Without hesitation, my mother placed her arm around my shoulder. Dad stood beside me with unmistakable pride on his face. The camera flashed. It wasn't just capturing a family picture. It was capturing the moment my family finally stopped seeing the uniform first and started seeing the daughter who had been wearing it all along. The wedding became one of those family stories people talked about for months, but not because of the elegant decorations or the beautiful venue. They remembered the moment 12 veterans stood together. More importantly, they remembered what happened afterward. A few months later, my mother surprised me by asking if she could attend a military appreciation ceremony on my base. When we arrived, she quietly watched service members greet one another like family. She listened to spouses talk about long deployments, parents speak proudly their sons and daughters, and veterans share stories of teamwork and sacrifice. On the drive home, she reached over and squeezed my hand. I understand now, she whispered. It's never been about the uniform. I smiled. It never was. Not long after, Ethan and Claire began volunteering at a local veterans support organization. Dad joined them at fundraising events, and for the first time, he proudly introduced me to everyone as his daughter, Captain Emma Brooks. Those words meant more than any applause ever could. Looking back, I realized respect doesn't always arrive when we hope it will. Sometimes it comes later after people choose to understand instead of assume. And when it finally arrives, it has the power to heal years of quiet misunderstanding with a single sincere act of acceptance. It has been almost a year since my brother's wedding, and every time I carefully hang my dress uniform in the closet, I think back to my mother's words, "Please, take it off." Today, those words no longer hurt because now she understands what she couldn't see then. The uniform was never about drawing attention. It was about honoring commitment, sacrifice, and the people who served beside me. My family no longer sees medals or ribbons first. They see a daughter, sister, a woman who chose to serve with pride. And if this journey taught me anything, it's this: never hide the part of yourself, years of honest work and dedication just to make others comfortable. The people who truly love you won't ask you to become smaller. They'll stand beside you proudly exactly as you are. How to DIY and expert content.